Hi, this is Professor Eric Bourne from Harrisburg Area Community College. I'm doing a discussion today on some readings from my 102 classrooms. We're going to help you out today with the first three from our What is Happiness chapter. We'll be looking at from the handbook at The Happy Life by Bertrand Russell and Inner Contentment by the Dalai Lama and Howard C. Cutler. Let's turn our attention first to From the Handbook, written by Epictetus. This is an ancient text that's been studied for a very long time. Its message speaks to a lot of people about how to live simply, how to let go of things that you cannot control, how to have a sense of perspective. This writing developed into a field of thought often called Stoicism. Let's peek at the text in particular. This first passage, section number 1, really sets up the whole reading. We read, "Some things are in our control, and others not. Things in our control are opinion, pursuit, desire, aversion, whatever are our own actions. Things not in our control are body, property, reputation, command, and in one word, whatever are not our own actions." Okay, we start with this distinction. What can I control? What can I not control? Now, we see the clear distinction here. Things that you have control over are largely how you respond to things, the opinions you hold of things, your thoughts, and what other people do and say outside. Now, why is it important to keep this distinction in mind? Well, we see that in the second paragraph. He says, if you suppose that these things which are outside of your control are if you think they are under. If that what belongs to others, if you think it is your own, then you will be hindered. You will lament, you will be disturbed, you will find fault with both gods and men. Okay, so if you're trying to control something that you can't, if you're fighting to control your reputation, the way that others think of you, then you're going to run into hindrance, because while you can have an effect on this, it's rather easy, for example, to make your reputation worse by your actions. Ultimately, that's up to other people. And you're going to find people who will never have a good opinion of you, and there is nothing you can do about it. However, on the other hand, Epictetus says, if you only try to control things you actually can control, then you'll have the right perspective on things. People won't be trying to restrain you because you won't be trying to do things that you can't. You won't be finding fault with people, you won't be accusing other people. Now, let's see how Epictetus applies this idea to certain contexts. Let's think about this passage about the voyage. We spent some time with this in class. Consider when, on a voyage, your ship is anchored. Okay. The metaphor here is you're on a beautiful sea voyage in the Aegean Sea, and your ship is stopped at an island, you're stretching your legs, you're getting some water, some supplies perhaps, to bring back to the ship. He says that one thing you need to do is keep your thoughts and attention toward the ship, waiting for the captain to call you on board. And when he calls, you need to immediately leave the things of the island, or you'll be thrown into the ship. So it is with life, he tells us. Part of the perspective that Epictetus wants us to keep in mind is that there are things that are not under our control that we need to be watching for. Now, one of the interpretations of this passage that is pretty compelling is that the captain's call is death. That all of us are going to die one day, and that is just outside of our control. Epictetus encourages you to get some peace and some direction on this by, instead of ignoring death the way many of us do, is to keep it in mind as something that is coming, something that may be imminent. You need to be ready for it. You need to have peace about it before you reach that moment when you see it coming. And particularly, he says this is important for the old. As you age and your death becomes more likely, this becomes something that you need to consider, something that needs to shape the way you approach each day. Let's look at one more passage here. We're going to be looking at section 17. Remember, Epictetus advises us, that you are an actor in a drama of such a kind as the author pleases to make. If short, of a short one; if long, of a long one. If it is his pleasure, you should act a poor man, a cripple, a governor. See to it that you act it naturally, for this is your business to act well the character assigned you. To choose it is another's. Here Epictetus is thinking about your place in life. One thing that you have no control over is where you were born and who you were born to. And particularly in Greek society at this time, your birth largely determined the circumstances of your life. Are you born the child of a governor? You would have wealth, you would have influence, you would have power, you would have responsibility. Are you the poor man? Are you born a slave? Well, that's the lot assigned to you. It may seem to you vastly less pleasurable than another man's life, but Epictetus reminds you that you have very little control over how you can actually change that. Now, there certainly is more upward mobility in our society in America today. We're able to transcend the circumstances of our birth to a remarkable extent, but not completely. Not all of us are born with the same advantages, and we can let that disparity eat at us. We can let it gnawed away at us, sap our attention and strength, or we can accept it and do what we can with what we have. And that would be Epictetus's suggestion and response. Let's turn to our second reading, looking at The Happy Life by Bertrand Russell. Russell is a philosopher early 20th century, and he puts forward here a moral philosophy known as hedonism. Now, typically in discussions of morality, you talk about going against our self-interest. We don't tend to have many moral conversations about the things that we want to do for ourselves. Typically, those are just considered you being you, following your desires, your passions, your needs. We typically talk about the moral as governing those situations where we have to go against our inclinations, when we need to do good for someone else at some kind of cost for ourselves, or to deny ourselves something that could be valuable to us out of concern for another person. So Russell, in this essay, talks a lot about professional moralists, traditional moralists, and their emphasis on self-denial. And that's exactly this idea of moral theory that just mentioned here. Russell thinks that we put too much emphasis in morality and focus on denying our own happiness, our own pleasure, what's good for us, and focus entirely too much on denying ourselves for the benefit of others in some way. He thinks this leads to an improper mindset. Looking at our third sentence here, conscious self-denial leaves a man self-absorbed and vividly aware of what he has sacrificed. If we're deliberately making decisions to try and not let it make us happy, do something good for us, then we're focused on ourselves still, and we're very aware of what we've sacrificed. And so as a consequence, Russell says, it fails of its immediate object and almost always of its ultimate purpose. This type of moral decision-making doesn't achieve its goal of getting you to consider others rather than yourself, and often doesn't succeed from the other person's view as well. So instead of denying ourselves, what does he say? We need that kind of direction or interest outward, which will lead spontaneously and naturally to those same acts. Okay. He wants to change your perspective so that the things that you do to encourage happiness and pleasure and good in this world are going to arise spontaneously, naturally, and lead you to these moral actions that moralists have been trying to encourage for a very long time. Now, a good example in his text that helps us understand these ideas of the traditional moralist versus the hedonist is in this second big paragraph of the reading. He talks about love. Now, he starts to note the traditional moralist position. He said that love should be unselfish. And this is definitely a way that many of us think about love. We think of love as a sacrifice. We love our children, we give up our time, we give up our finances, we make space in our home, we clean those poopy diapers, we give of ourselves out of our love. In the context of a relationship as between husband and wife, which is more the focus of this paragraph, the moralist here is saying that you need to be giving. You need to be focused on your partner's happiness, your partner's need. You need to be building them up. Now, Russell agrees with this to a point. In a certain sense, he is right. The traditional moralist is right. We should not be selfish beyond a point. Clearly, there are some very selfish things you can do in a relationship to hurt you, to hurt your partner, to hurt your relationship. But Russell wants to make a distinction here. He wants to say it should undoubtedly be of such a nature that one's own happiness is bound up in its success. Relationships should be mutually happy, pleasurable. They should be building up both parties involved. Denying yourself in a relationship is denying, according to Russell, part of the possibility of that relationship. So we have to a certain extent, think about ourselves. Problems arise when we don't. This shows us more broadly what Russell thinks is the basis of happiness. Notice what he says closer to the end here. All unhappiness depends on some kind of disintegration or lack of integration. You think happiness relies on coming together, people having a mutual connection, this underlying unity to human experience. Unhappiness, to him, occurs when we are separate, when we keep things apart. One more reading. Let's turn our attention to Inner Contentment from the Dalai Lama and Howard C. Cutler. This essay focuses initially on this idea of desire. And Cutler asks, my culture seems sick. We're based on material acquisition. We're buying things. We're surrounded by just this constant bombardment of advertisements, this culture of here's what you need to buy, here's what you need to have, you need to upgrade, you need the best. He says it's so hard to be influenced by that. Can you talk about desire and how we can control it? Oh, excuse me there, too fast of a scroll. Let's try it again, here we go. Now, the Lama replies, I think there are two kinds of desire. Certain desires are positive, a desire for happiness. Certain desires are unreasonable, leading to trouble. Okay. So, the Lama is suggesting here that certain the things that you want, that you desire to bring into your life are going to be very good. Some of them are negative. How do we determine which is positive, which is negative? Now, the first way he talks about this distinction is by looking at your circumstances. For example, desiring a car. He says, hey, if you're in a prosperous society where your city is laid out in a way that requires you to have a car or just not go anywhere, then hey, that's part of what you need for your day-to-day life. But if you live, as he says, in a poor village in India where you can manage quite well without, but you still desire one, you can cause trouble, cause uncomfortable feeling among your neighbors. It can cause jealousy, and there is issues of your community. Now, you'll see this a couple times in this essay, this idea of community. The Dalai Lama isn't hung up on one person's happiness. He doesn't want you to focus entirely on yourself, but how your actions and decisions and desires affect the community that you're in. Now, Cutler comes up with an objection here. He says, well, hold on. If I can afford these things, if I can have an expensive car without it, preventing me from feeding my family, then how can this be a problem? I'm getting satisfaction and enjoyment. And here we see the Lama firmly return to this idea of community. Self-satisfaction cannot determine if a desire action is positive or negative. This isn't just about you. And here's where he brings up the example of the murderer. The murderer might feel satisfied at the time he's committing his act, but that doesn't justify it. We can't just look at our own responses. This brings us back to where we start, this idea of our culture of material acquisition. And this is where the word greed is showing up. Excessive desire. It's called here an exaggerated form of desire based on over-expectation. When you expect too much out of what you purchase. And if you think that brand new iPad mini with the Retina screen is really going to change your life around, you're expecting too much from what you purchase. And when you throw all your resources at it, you're going to find frustration. You're going to find that you're disappointed with what you have acquired. And your only responses to that point are to see your acquisition as a failure, or to keep acquiring more, to keep pushing off that moment of disappointment. And that is what most of us in this material culture end up doing. The Dalai Lama says that this greed becomes limitless, bottomless. There's no end to what we want to acquire. How do we solve this? Suggestion here in this helpfully italicized text is that the antidote of greed is contentment. In order to deal with greed, you have to learn a stopping point. You need to be content with where you are. You need to be content with what you have. To conclude then, let's consider how you achieve this inner contentment. How do you get away from this culture of greed and acquisition? Now, Cutler points out two methods. And one, he says, hey, you can obtain everything that you want and desire. Get that house, that money, that perfect mate, that perfect body. But Cutler is pretty skeptical of this approach. Sooner or later, he says, we'll run up against something that we want but can't have. The second and more reliable method is, he says, not to have what we want, but rather to want and appreciate what we have. It's a remarkable statement, and one that I'll try not to muddle up too much for you. Not to have what we want, but to want what we have. I think this might be significant, particularly in terms of relationships. Many of us get stuck looking for something better. We're dating, but we're never really settling down. We're never really investing in another person. Learning to want what we have, learning to appreciate what is already there for us, can lead us to discover happiness in very unexpected places. Alright folks, I have talked long enough. I hope this was helpful for you in engaging with the ideas of the text. I will see you in class.